The station floated in silence. Out there, beyond the silver glass of the observation deck, stars shimmered like scattered dust. Space always looked calm from a distance, but Dr. Elias Corrin knew how loud it could be in the right frequencies. Every second, strange signals passed through the antennas of Station Seraph, whispering patterns from worlds humanity had never seen. For Elias, this silence was home. He liked it. He liked the steady rhythm of data logs, the hum of machines, the soft glow of the console lights. The quiet meant peace. It meant order, nothing unexpected. Until that day. He was reviewing a signal burst when the door to the observation deck slid open with a faint hiss. The sound startled him, not because it was loud, but because it was unusual. Hardly anyone came up here. A woman stepped inside. She moved softly, her uniform clean and crisp, her badge catching the blue light from the monitors. But her eyes, and they were something else. They were calm, yet full of weight, as if she had seen something she couldn't forget. She looked around the deck for a moment before her gaze settled on him. "Dr. Elias Corrin?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but firm. Elias stood up quickly. "Yes, that's me," she nodded slightly. "I'm Ambassador Lyra Vell. Central Command sent me to review communications from this sector." Her tone was polite, almost too polite. Elias gave a small smile. "I didn't know they were sending anyone." "They didn't announce it," she replied. "It was a short notice assignment." There was a pause. It wasn't awkward exactly. More like both of them were waiting for something the other might say. Elias gestured toward a chair near the console. "You can sit if you like. There's not much to see, but the view helps pass time." She smiled faintly, sitting down with care. "It's beautiful, but I'm not here for the view." He waited for her to say more, but she didn't. Instead, her eyes wandered to the main screen where the current signal was displayed. A steady wave pattern scrolled across it, faint, repeating every few minutes. "That's from Sector 9R, Elias explained. "Glad to have something technical to talk about. We've been picking it up for 3 weeks. Still trying to identify the source. Could be background noise, could be a malfunction." Lyra leaned closer. "Does it repeat?" "Yes, at irregular intervals. But the pattern's too clean for natural interference." She looked at the data for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "That's not just noise." Elias turned his head. "You recognize it?" She hesitated, as if deciding whether to tell him. "I've seen something like this before. Years ago, in a classified project." The air seemed to thicken. Elias didn't know why, but he suddenly felt the weight of her words. Classified, project. Those were not casual terms. Before he could ask more, her wrist comm beeped softly. She checked it quickly, then looked back up. "I'll need full access to your signal archives. Everything from the last 6 months." "That's unusual," Elias said. "Most reviews only need the last 30 days. "This one's different," she replied, her voice calm again but her eyes sharper now. "Please, Doctor. It's important." Elias hesitated for a second, then nodded. "All right. I'll arrange the access codes." He walked to the side console, entering the authorization sequence. As he worked, he noticed her reflection in the glass. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at the starfield outside, her face thoughtful, almost sad. When he finished, he turned back. "Done, you'll have everything you need." "Thank you," she said softly. The rest of the day passed strangely. Lyra spent hours reviewing the signals, barely speaking, her attention fixed on the scrolling data. Elias tried to focus on his usual duties, but he couldn't stop glancing her way. There was something about her. The stillness, the careful way she breathed, like someone trying not to disturb a fragile truth. At dinner time, they met again in the small mess hall. The station had only 6 crew members, but that night it was empty except for them. The others were off duty, asleep or busy elsewhere. Elias sat across from her, a simple tray of rehydrated food between them. "So, Ambassador," he began lightly, "what's Central Command really looking for out here?" She looked up from her tablet. "You think I'd tell you if I knew?" He smiled. "I think you might, eventually." That earned him a tiny laugh. "You're curious. I analyze signals for a living. Curiosity is all I have." She took a sip of water, her gaze distant again. "Maybe that's why they sent you here." Her words made him pause. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she tapped the tablet screen and turned it toward him. "This is your signal," she said. the one from Sector 9R. On the screen, the waveform looped endlessly. But now that he saw it close up, he noticed something he hadn't before. Small gaps in the signal, tiny intervals that seemed almost deliberate. Those gaps form a pattern, she explained.
Look at the spacing.
Elias leaned closer, his scientist mind immediately catching on. It's symmetrical. Like code markers, she nodded slowly. Exactly. This isn't random space noise, Dr. Corrin, it's a structured transmission. Elias sat back, feeling his pulse quicken. From where? Her eyes lowered. That's the question I'm here to answer. The air between them grew heavy again. Lyra's expression didn't change, but her eyes said everything her voice didn't. She already knew more than she was allowed to tell. Later that night, Elias stayed in the control room long after she'd gone to her quarters. He replayed the signal again and again, amplifying, filtering, slowing it down. The rhythm began to sound almost like speech. Not words, but intention, he frowned. It's impossible, he murmured to himself. A faint sound behind him made him turn. Lyra stood at the doorway, her hair slightly unkempt, as if she hadn't slept either. You hear it too, she said quietly. He nodded. It's too organized to be an accident. She walked closer, her steps soft. We've intercepted similar signals before. Only twice. Both times from outside mapped human space. Elias blinked. Outside? You mean... Yes, she said, cutting him off gently. Beyond the frontier. Places we don't have colonies. He looked back at the screen, the signal still pulsing like a heartbeat. So what's out there? Her answer was almost a whisper. That's what we've been afraid to find out. Elias turned to her, confusion and curiosity battling inside him. Afraid? Why? Lyra hesitated. Because sometimes the things we find are closer to us than we expect. For a moment, they both stood silent, the low hum of the station filling the space between words. Then, as if deciding something within herself, she leaned closer to the console and typed a command. The signal slowed further, breaking into visual code. Symbols appeared, small, repeating unmistakably human characters. Elias froze. Those are Earth numerals. Lyra met his gaze, her expression calm but her eyes alive with meaning. Now you understand why I'm here. She left soon after, saying she needed to send a report to command. But Elias knew she wouldn't tell them everything, not yet. He could see it in her face. Whatever she'd found, it wasn't something she wanted buried in bureaucracy. As the door slid shut behind her, Elias stared at the empty room. The hum of the signal continued in the background, soft and rhythmic, like breathing. He didn't know what was coming next. But he knew one thing for certain. When she had entered that day, she had brought more than orders or authority. She had brought truth, the kind that hides in silence, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And her eyes had said everything he wasn't ready to hear. The next morning, Station Seraph woke to the quiet rhythm of machines. Artificial dawn lights glowed through the halls, painting the walls with pale gold. Dr. Elias Corrin sat in the communications bay, a half-finished mug of synth coffee beside him, his eyes locked on the waveforms dancing across the screen. He hadn't slept much. The signal had taken hold of his thoughts like a puzzle that refused to let go. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. And now he couldn't stop hearing it, even in silence. That faint pulse repeating over and over in his mind. At 0700 hours, the door slid open, and Ambassador Lyra Vell stepped in. She looked as composed as always, though there was a quiet tension around her eyes, the kind that came from too many secrets held too long. Good morning, Doctor, she said softly. Elias looked up. Morning. You've been up early too? I didn't sleep much either, she admitted. I kept thinking about the signal. He gestured to the screen. It's been repeating all night. Same pattern, same intervals. No sign of source drift. Lyra came closer, her gaze fixed on the data. That means the origin point is steady, she said. It's not moving with any natural orbit. Elias nodded. So it's not a planet or asteroid. It's something stable, maybe artificial. Lyra exhaled slowly. Then we're looking at a structure. Or a vessel. Her words hung in the air. A vessel, out beyond mapped human space, sending coded messages in ancient Earth numerals. The idea felt impossible, but also too exact to dismiss. For the next few hours, they worked side by side. Elias focused on decoding, while Lyra accessed encrypted files from her secure tablet. Every so often, she'd glance at him, as if checking whether he discovered too much too soon. Finally, Elias turned to her. "You said you'd seen this before," he said carefully. "When?" She hesitated, then said quietly, 5 years ago. A different signal. Same structure, same type of gaps, but the source came from another sector, much further out. And what did it mean? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tapped on her tablet and brought up a set of symbols, almost identical to the ones they'd decoded. "We never cracked it completely," she said. "But we found partial translations. Words or maybe names. The first was origin, the second—" She paused. "The second was home." Elias blinked. "Home?" "Yes." She looked at him now, her eyes calm but full of something deeper. Fear or maybe awe. "We thought it was a coincidence. Some kind of echo, but now, this transmission repeats the same 2 words again, only clearer." Elias stared at the data again. "You think someone out there is calling us?" "Or reminding us," she said quietly, "that we're not as alone as we think." The next few days blurred into long hours of analysis. The rest of the station crew stayed mostly unaware. Command had ordered secrecy about the signal. To them, Lyra was just another inspector. Only Elias knew the truth, and even he felt like he was holding fragments of a story too large to understand. One night, when the others had gone to rest, Lyra found Elias in the observation deck. He was staring at the stars again, lost in thought. "You should rest," she said softly from behind him. He smiled faintly. "I could say the same to you." She came to stand beside him, folding her arms. The vastness outside the window reflected in her dark eyes. "Do you ever think," she began, "that maybe space isn't empty at all? Maybe it's full, just silent?" Elias looked at her. "You sound like a philosopher." "Maybe I'm tired of being a diplomat," she replied with a small smile. They stood in quiet for a while, watching a distant nebula shimmer in faint blue light. Then Elias said, "What happens if we decode the full message? What will command do?" Lyra's smile faded. "They'll classify it, hide it, maybe even erase it. Why? Because humanity doesn't like questions it can't control," she said softly. "We like to believe we're the first, the only ones who made it this far. Finding out otherwise changes everything." Elias nodded slowly. "So you're not here to review operations?" Her eyes met his. "No." He waited for her to explain, but she looked away. "I'm here to decide if we should respond." That night, Lyra couldn't sleep again. She sat alone in her quarters, the faint hum of the engines filling the silence. On her tablet, she watched the decoded fragments loop endlessly. Origin. Home. Origin. Home. She remembered the old reports. The lost generation ships, launched centuries before faster-than-light travel. Great steel vessels carrying thousands of dreamers into deep space. Most were never heard from again. But what if one survived? She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, could they have found something? The next morning, Elias entered the comms room to find Lyra already there. She looked tired but focused. "I found something new," she said. He came closer. On the screen, a new layer of the signal had been isolated, faint, almost hidden beneath the main pattern. "It's a second transmission," she explained, encoded behind the first one. "That's why we missed it." Elias frowned, adjusting the filters. The screen flickered and lines of symbols appeared. This time there was no doubt. They were human letters. The message read, "We are still here." Elias stared at it, speechless. Lyra whispered, "After all these years..." He turned to her. "Lyra, this can't be real. Those ships were launched centuries ago. Even with cryo, even with advanced systems." "I know," she interrupted. "But it's not impossible. If they found a way to adapt, to evolve..." Her voice trailed off. Elias sat down, his hands shaking slightly. "If this is true, then they're not just surviving, they're trying to reach us." Lyra nodded slowly. "And we have to decide what to say back." Hours passed as they debated the possibilities. Could it be a hoax? A distortion? Or was it truly the voice of lost humanity reaching across the dark? Finally, Lyra stood. "I need to contact command," she said. "They'll want immediate confirmation." Elias hesitated. "And then what?" "They'll bury it again." She looked torn. "Maybe, but I can't ignore protocol." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "If you send it, they'll classify it. They'll call it a false signal. You know how they are, and I do," she said softly. But I have to try. Before she could move, the console beeped. A new signal was arriving. Elias looked at the data. It was stronger than before, closer. Lyra's eyes widened. It's the same source. The message repeated, "We are still here. We are still here." Then, for the first time, a new word appeared, one that made both of them freeze. "Listen." The signal cut out. Silence filled the room. Elias whispered, "They know we're receiving." Lyra's hands trembled slightly, though her voice stayed calm. "Then they're not just sending blindly. They're waiting for a response." She looked at him, her eyes filled with quiet determination. "This changes everything, Doctor." He nodded slowly. "Then let's not waste the chance." Later that evening, Lyra walked alone through the dim corridors of the station. She stopped by the viewport again, watching the stars drift like silent witnesses. Somewhere out there, humans, or something that had once been human when we're calling to them. She touched the glass gently. "If you really are still there," she whispered, "we'll find you." Behind her, Elias's voice broke the quiet. "You already believe them, don't you?" She turned, surprised but not startled. He was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, tired but smiling faintly. "I don't know what I believe," she said honestly. "But I know this, the message feels human, hopeful." Elias nodded. "Maybe that's what scares Command the most. Hope is harder to control than fear." Lyra smiled a little. "Then maybe it's time someone stopped being afraid." He looked out at the stars beside her. "If they're waiting for us to listen, we should answer." Her eyes met his again, calm, certain, full of quiet resolve. "Yes," she said softly. "But not yet. Not until we understand what they're trying to tell us." Elias nodded. "Then we keep listening." And as the hum of the station filled the silence once more, they stood together in the dim light, two humans on the edge of the unknown, waiting, decoding, believing that across the endless dark, someone somewhere was waiting for them too. For 2 days, Station Seraph drifted in a quiet tension. The strange signal from beyond human space had not returned. Yet its last word, "Listen," echoed through every corner of the station like a heartbeat. Dr. Elias Corrin sat before the main console, replaying the recording again and again. He could almost feel it now. The message wasn't just sound. It was layered with meaning, rhythm, and a pulse that almost felt alive. He rubbed his tired eyes. "What are you trying to say?" He whispered into the empty room. Behind him, the door opened with a soft hiss. Ambassador Lyra Vell stepped in, carrying a small data tablet and a look of quiet resolve. "You're still here," she said gently. "I can't stop thinking about it," he admitted. "Every time I run the data, I find something new. It's almost like the signal is growing." Lyra came closer. "It is. I checked the spectrum scans. The amplitude's increasing, just slightly, but it's enough to suggest feedback." Elias frowned. "Feedback?" She nodded. "Meaning, they might be responding to us." He blinked, surprise lighting his face. "Responding? But we didn't send anything." "Maybe we did," she said quietly. "Maybe just by listening." Elias leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. "That's impossible." "Maybe," she said with a small, knowing smile. "But impossible things built our entire civilization." They stood in silence for a while, watching the faint pulse on the monitor. Then Elias said softly, "Command hasn't replied to our last report." "They won't," Lyra said simply. "They don't want this going public." "Not yet," Elias looked at her sharply. "So what do we do? Just wait?" Lyra hesitated, then placed the tablet on the table between them. On its surface glowed lines of text, partially decoded fragments from the latest signal sweep. "Look at this," she said. He leaned forward. Among the familiar numerals and phrases, a new pattern had appeared, short groups of letters forming half-words. He read aloud, "Light, years apart, we remember." He looked up at her, eyes wide. "That's not random." "No," she said softly. "It's a message." Her voice was calm, but her eyes shone with something deeper, awe mixed with sadness. Elias's mind raced. "Lyra, if this is real, then whoever sent it. They're human. They're our own kind," she nodded slowly. "Yes, and they've been out there for centuries waiting for us to find them. For hours, they worked together decoding fragments and cross-referencing patterns." The message grew longer, clearer. It spoke not of war or fear, but of endurance, generations of travelers surviving against the odds, adapting to new worlds and still holding on to one idea: we are human. At one point, Elias leaned back in his chair and said, almost in awe, they didn't just survive, they built a new life. Lyra smiled faintly, and now they're reaching back to remind us who we are. He turned toward her. Command will never let this spread. They'll lock it away. I know, she said softly. That's why we can't wait for permission. Elias stared at her. You want to answer them? Lyra's eyes met his, calm, unwavering, full of quiet fire. Yes. That night the station's lights dimmed to night mode. Outside the stars hung motionless, a silent audience. In the communications bay, Elias and Lyra worked quietly, synchronizing systems for a manual broadcast. It was risky. The station wasn't built for deep-range transmissions, and command would detect the signal within minutes. But neither of them cared anymore. Elias adjusted the controls. If we send this, we'll lose our jobs. Maybe worse, Lyra smiled faintly. You sound afraid. He laughed softly. Maybe I am. Good, she said. It means you understand the risk. But fear doesn't mean we stop. It means we keep going anyway. He looked at her for a long moment. What should we say? She thought for a while, then said, something simple. Something honest, he nodded, fingers hovering over the keyboard. All right. You choose the words. Lyra stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke. We hear. We are coming. Elias typed it slowly, the words glowing on the screen like a promise. Before they could send it, the console flickered. A sudden burst of static filled the room. Elias froze. It's the signal again, he said. The sound deepened, the pattern shifting. The waveform began to change, faster, sharper, more organized. Lyra's eyes widened. They're transmitting live. The computer translated the incoming code in real time. Words formed on the screen one by one. We wait. We remember. The light still guides, Elias whispered. They know we're here. The station lights flickered again as the energy surge passed through the comms array. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hum with resonance, as if the station itself was responding to the distant call. Then the message stopped. Silence returned. Lyra looked at Elias, her voice soft but certain. We have to answer now, he nodded. Let's do it. He pressed the transmit key. The signal pulsed outward, carrying their short message. We hear. We are coming. The light on the console glowed steady green. The message had been sent, they waited. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then faintly the console beeped again. A reply had arrived. Elias leaned forward, breath held. The text appeared slowly on the screen. Welcome home. The words hung in the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Lyra covered her mouth, eyes shining. They understood, she whispered. Elias could barely speak. It's real. They're human. She smiled, tears in her eyes. And they've been waiting for us all this time. He turned toward her. What do we do now? Lyra exhaled, steadying herself. Now we tell the truth, whether command likes it or not. The following morning, they sent one last encrypted message to Central Command, including the full decoded transmission. Elias added a personal note. You told us to listen. We did. And what we heard proves humanity never stopped reaching for the stars. They knew the message would be intercepted, reviewed, possibly erased, but it didn't matter. The truth was already out there, carried in the beam of light they had sent to the far edge of known space. That night, as the station settled into its usual hum, Lyra stood again at the viewport. The stars stretched endless before her, cold and bright. But now they didn't feel empty. Somewhere out there, others, their own kind, were looking back. Elias joined her, standing quietly beside her. Do you think they'll find us? He asked. They already have, she said with a soft smile. We just haven't reached them yet. He nodded, eyes on the endless horizon. It's strange. All this time we thought we were exploring the universe. Maybe we were just finding our way back to ourselves. Lyra turned to him, her eyes full of quiet strength. Maybe that's what humanity always does. We lose ourselves, then we remember. We fall silent, then we listen. And when the time comes, she looked out again, her voice calm but filled with emotion. We answer. Days later, a final signal came through, faint but steady. It was a map, encoded with coordinates far beyond any known chart. Lyra and Elias stared at it in disbelief. It was an invitation. Elias smiled. Looks like they're showing us the way. Lyra nodded. Then it's time we follow. They stood side by side, watching the stars shift in slow arcs across the window. The station hummed quietly beneath their feet, and for the first time in years, Elias felt something he hadn't known he'd lost: hope. In the endless silence of space, humanity had found its echo. Not in war, not in conquest, but in connection. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, whispering the words that had started it all. She entered quietly, but her eyes said everything I wasn't ready to hear. When she opened them again, she smiled. Now we're ready,